research on conflict and conflict processes, or how we should, and how we should go about the business of peace building as well. This is where we're going. So the project itself, it's kind of funny because academics talk about different things at different points in time. Cool. All right. What became interesting for me was it turns out that myself and my team have actually spent more time in Rwanda than almost any group of individuals, but we never kind of actually talked about it. So some people talk about, oh, you know, we went to this and we talked to some perpetrators in prisons and, oh, we did a little bit of this. And we didn't talk about it. We were just collecting information. And then when you actually, when I'm doing this slide, I'm like, wow, we did a lot. Okay, so went to Rwanda 6 times, did interviews with government personnel, human rights activists, genocidaires, in and out of prison, survivors, bystanders. We did numerous focus groups in the capital city and also Butare, but a couple other locations. We conducted a public opinion poll, which was like, methodologically is the most complex, one of the most complex things that I'd done until India actually, where basically you were trying to like, how do you draw a random sample in a rural population where no one's really sure where everybody is? So what we had to do was find something that was in every location, which was a well, and then spatially drew like within a 2-mile radius or something like that, this kind of concentric zones, and then we're randomly selecting a certain number of households in each zone, and then from that house, the first one you come across, you go to every 6th one in that particular zone. It was just some crazy nightmare. We still haven't written that piece up because we got so disgusted with other stuff, but that's another story. Did this content analysis of all media coverage of Rwanda. So not Rwandan genocide, not Rwandan civil violence, just Rwanda. And just try to get a sense of internationally, how was this country covered? And this allowed us from 85 to 99 to get some sense prior to some of the violence, to get some idea of kind of what people were highlighting. Most of it's guerrillas. And, you know, and so there's a very diminished understanding that we have of the country. And then a content analysis of Rwandan government documents, human rights reports from Rwanda, as well as international organizations, which will be the bulk of the information I talk about today. And then served as an expert witness for the prosecution as well as the defense of the International Criminal Tribunal in Rwanda. And that's a much longer story. Several collaborators assisted with the project. Alan Stam, co-principal, David Armstrong, researcher, former graduate student, Simon Laurel, current grad student, Nicholas Greenfield, assisted with GIS. It's amazing. The slide actually would list a lot more people, but it's like names have been left off to protect the innocent. So a bunch of people helped us anonymously, and so I'd like to thank them as well, but they get hurt, so I can't. The data collected for the project, this is why it took 12 years. Effectively, what I was trying to do was identify as much information as possible regarding everything that took place, all activities that took place during the 100 days. So starting in April, moving through July, try to identify all events. Then subset it from that to kind of all violent events. And then subset it from that to identify all deaths. So there's numerous sources that were used. Now this becomes somewhat complex. So some sources considered the whole country. Some sources considered only large-scale violent activity. So we have the 2x2 that helps us identify the variety of different sources that are involved. Now, initially with the project, we were using some kind of Bayesian methodology, which basically allows you to take all information that you're deriving, regardless of the particular level and how much information is collected, and then you're calibrating across the different sources to generate estimates. And that had been a large amount of what we were doing. We then kind of stepped back from some of that because it ended up involving some simulations that we didn't necessarily feel comfortable with, but it did emerge from the data itself. So we adopted a different type of approach, which was kind of like, let's take all the source material that we have, and we will take an estimate from all the source material that exists in a particular location at a particular time. What's this look like? This looks like this. And exactly what you do with the rows, So just take Gitisi. So one source accounts for 13,000. Another source accounts for 54,000. Another source accounts for 5. Another one accounts for 11. I don't like him, so I won't mention that one. There's a bunch of problems with a bunch of the studies, but you have this range of values. What do you do with the range? So part of what the project has done is all their stuff is available. If you believe that a particular source should be trusted more than others, then you're free to basically go about your business of analyzing things in line with what you think is most appropriate. If you trust government sources more than you do non-government sources, then you could take those. If you trust international sources more than you trust national sources, then you could use those. So part of the project is transparency. We've made more available, we've made more data available about the topic than anybody else, in part because we're trying to get away from all of the hidden aspects of the discussion of the data collection effort. So you could analyze what you wish and put it together as you see fit. But we maximize on basically taking the average value from all sources that were available in a particular location. I'll show you what this looks like in a bit. So fundamentally, what I'm doing in the piece now is trying to take the data that was compiled and then look at these 7 dimensions of Rwanda 1994, and using all the information that we have, these estimations as well as a bunch of other information I'll talk about as well, get a sense of what the range is, and then also come up with some ideas about which one we think is most reasonable. So I'll start with dimension 1, and this deals with the nature of the killing. So here we were just trying to figure out, was the killing that took place generally concentrated or more diffuse throughout the society across space and time? Is it consistent? Is it variable? And so we tried to observe what was going on, conduct our analysis, and then see if this helped us figure out if the killing was concentrated or diffuse. Why do we care if it's concentrated or diffuse? Well, this actually involves a bunch of things. So intervention is easier in, guess what? More concentrated killings. It's easier to do. If killings are more concentrated, this suggests that we have to focus in on a particular group of individuals in a particular place, which is a lot easier to do than if something is taking place in different locations. Now we need to wonder if this is the same group moving around, or it's different groups of people that are instructed, like in the hate radio thesis, different people are instructed to kind of get started. But it's just like a preliminary mapping. What took place, when and where. So I'll show you a few of these. This is the first of our animations. So with our anonymous GIS support, we took the information, the data that we had, and we created this animation of Rwanda. So what you will see is these are communes. So what you will see is a particular commune, and all we're identifying at this point is if any of the source material identified that there was violent deaths in this particular location at all. So you can imagine if you've watched the same film for like 6 or 8 years, you see a great deal. One thing you see, it's diffuse. Your killings taking place all over the place. So part of what we tried to do is, all right, now we have some sense of what was going on and how it spread across space and time. Time is moving in the upper right-hand corner, by the way. This became very useful for us to try to figure out exactly whether or not this was matching up with the anecdotal pieces that were emerging. There's a lot of individuals that write about what had happened to them, and we're trying to kind of take that information and overlay that with this information as well, corroborating as well as we're able to the different source material that emerges. Now, what becomes interesting is some people are more familiar with certain parts of Rwanda than others, and so they're kind of like zeroing in on the spot that they're focusing in on. We're actually attempting to be as comprehensive as possible and get a sense of the whole country over the relevant time period. Just so you know, we will get to a sense of how many people are dying in each one of these flashes, but that's a separate issue, and so we're trying to address this one first. What becomes, at a certain point in time, you stop going from flashes of violent activity all throughout Rwanda to certain smatterings of individual events in particular locations, and this is just a summary piece of if it had violence at all during the time period. So what you see is almost all of Rwanda had at least one source identified that there was violence, except for a few up in the north. That's usually attributed, so this starts in 1994, so this is usually attributed to the fact that the RPF was up north and that a lot of people fled that particular area and then went to Kigali. But you do notice that there's a couple other locations where there's no reported violence taking place. Dimension 2, type of killing. How do you detect the type of killing in a particular location? So some of it is an issue of who's there, who's engaging in the activity. We generally think of genocide as being undertaken by governments. A government targeting a particular ethnic group with a desire to eliminate them in whole or in part. The definition doesn't really say anything about whether or not it has to be government. It's just presumed that they have the capabilities to do it. So it could be some other actor, but principally we associate that with governments. Politicide is a phrase kind of created by social scientists to kind of address this kind of gap within the genocide literature, just focusing on ethnicity, adding to the conceptions of what was going on an idea that it could be political opponents that's serving as the targeting mechanism, not ethnicity. Civil war. This is when you have a rebel insurgent group going against a government and people are killed in that particular context. Reprisal killings, I view this as the rebel group is forging ahead, so the battlefront is in front of me, and behind me is the area where that's kind of behind our battle zone. That's behind our zone of control. Reprisal killings, I argue, is when you as the rebel are killing individuals that are behind you. Now, I'm not going into why they're doing it. I'm just looking at if there's any evidence whatsoever of people that are being killed behind you. So civil war would be exactly where I am. Genocide would be in front of me. Reprisal killings behind. And this random bit where there's just people getting killed. We don't really know what to call this. So like in gang literature, they call this wilding. And this is just like people taking advantage of a decay in social order and engaging in violent activity. So as a way of getting some purchase and trying to understand what was going on, I basically focused in on a couple of categories. The categories for me were based on who's responsible for, who's in control of a particular territory, and if violence takes place in that zone, I deem them at least plausibly to be responsible for it, but acknowledge that even within your zone, there could be some random activity going on, and the only reason we would know if it's random or not is if we got back to the level of the event and then asked the particulars of individuals of what took place in that specific location. But territorially, we can kind of break certain things down. So the green represents where the RPF were located in early April of 1994. How we know where they were. Well, the Canadian military, luckily, had some satellite images of exactly where the troops were located. That took me 3 years to get. We then took that satellite imagery, took the troop locations, and then we compared that to CIA estimates, which we also compared to Defense Intelligence Analysts' estimates, which is where, who's the intervention guy? Cooperman's book. We calibrated it against that. We then took the combination of those three estimates and then approached some individuals that were in the former FAR to ask them do we have your locations down more or less correctly. And at the same time, we were contacting individuals that were with the RPF to identify where their troops were. We took all those 5, and then we created this boundary, but then we animated over time. Now, we do this because the killings that take place on the green line That'll be the Civil War deaths. The killings that take place in the white, that's under the jurisdiction of the FAR. The killings that take place within the green